be a couple of questions to staff, if I could, Mr. Chair. Through you, Mr. Chair. The sign bylaw, there seems to be a suggestion that it is so generic that it isn't a sign, but the reason we need it is to tell people what the business is. Can you please, staff, lay out for me precisely why this, in your opinion, does not require the need to meet the sign bylaw?
Thank you, through Mr. Chair. Staff did look into this in some detail. The sign bylaw is quite general in its interpretation, in the way it's worded. The way staff is interpreting this is that those garage doors, or the fake garage doors, are architectural features. They are not actual signs. Buildings, part of our discussion was architectural buildings always have architectural features to draw attention to buildings. So architects tend to put that on many of the buildings to draw attention, a nice looking building and design. That is what we are interpreting these garage doors to be, an architectural feature that draws attention, adds character, adds interest to the building. In addition, in terms of design guidelines, it talks about breaking up massing and long blank walls, and our interpretation is that those fake doors do break up a long, massive blank wall, add interest to the building, and meet all requirements as not interpreted to be a sign under the sign bylaw.
Thank you. Another question, if I could, through you, Mr. Chair. There was a suggestion that the absence of the curbing within the parking area is in contravention to our existing bylaw. Could you tell me about that curbing and its...
Thank you, yes. Through Mr. Chair, under the original DP there wasn't curbing in place. My understanding through a discussion is that curbing will be put in place through this development permit. So there will be curbing and will meet the bylaw.
And so through you, Mr. Chair, with that, it's tied down. Absolutely, it's not with my understanding, but it
is tied down through the development permit in terms of it must meet the requirements of the zoning bylaw, which require curbing.
So, through you, Mr. Chair, once that is in place, the examples like the slate truck that we saw in the photograph, it would be impossible for that type of parking.
I can't recall the photograph, I'm sorry, through Mr. Chair, but certainly if it was brought up against the curbing will be at the end of the parking stalls, so certainly that would, yeah, absolutely, there would be a curb there to stop that from happening.
Thank you. And one more question, if I could, Mr. Chair. There was concern that if there was a relaxation of the parking requirement, that should the tenant change, that the die is cast and that forever there would be less parking required. Can you elaborate on whether this is tied to this particular development and what would happen in the future if this business changed?
Certainly this is tied to this particular development. Should a business change that does not meet the use of the zoning bylaw, then the parking would be examined. If the parking, if a use came in that met the parking of the if a use came in that met the requirements of the zoning bylaw in terms of being a permitted use, the parking would be okay in terms of them being able to access the site. But if it was a change in use that wasn't consistent with the zoning bylaw, parking would be analyzed.
Just through you, Mr. Chair, but this is a request for a variance. Mm-hmm. Does the variance live beyond this particular tenant?
It's being varied. Yes, it would live beyond this particular tenant. It would, yeah.
So through you, Mr. Chair, the concern that was expressed, I'm not saying whether or not how much weight it should be given, but the concern which was expressed has validity then?
There is some validity to that, yes, through Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor German. Thank you, Mr. Chair. For you to planning, is the parking variance then not tied to the development permit?
The parking variance is being...
this isn't a rezoning.
It's not a rezoning, but it's a development permit. And when a development permit comes before council, if there's any non-conformities with the zoning bylaw, that is when we try to address them at that time. If an applicant came in for a change of use to a different business in this facility that did not need to come before council for a development permit, we wouldn't be addressing a parking variance.
Okay, but that doesn't quite address what I was asking. We are being asked to give parking variance based on the specific use in this property. Doesn't need as many cars. However, it is under the M1 zone, and other uses might need more parking. So are you telling me then that those other uses could come along and take advantage of the variance even though it was intended for the specific use that is undertaking this development permit?
The way that the bylaw is applied is that if an applicant comes in for a business license, let's use this example, and they meet the zoning bylaw in terms of use, we don't bring them before council for a parking variance if they are over parking. And that's an application of the zoning bylaw. It's been a long-standing application of the zoning bylaw. So this variance would carry forward. If an applicant came forward for a change in use, like a rezoning, like I had mentioned, they would come before council in terms of the change use of zoning. The reason the parking variance is being addressed in this case is because they're coming before council for a development permit. Because they're coming before council, it is recognized that the variance is required, it doesn't meet it, and we want to bring the property into conformance while we're in front of council. So we do propose the variance for the parking at that time.
Is there a way to tie the variance to the specific development permit or the specific use?
We could do that through the development permit. In terms of language in the development permit, that the parking variance applies to a self-storage facility. I'd certainly want to review that with our legal advice, but I've seen those types of requirements in development permits.
I think that would be important because the feature of this particular use is that it, in all likelihood, requires much less parking than would another permitted use under the existing zone. So I would like to get the information and would have some difficulty until I got that information making a decision. I'd like to know if that use could be in fact tied to the specific, rather that variance could be tied either to the specific use or the development permit or accomplish the first through the latter.
Thank you. Councillor Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through your staff. I want to know, have we the ability to determine what hours of operation they would operate?
Through Mr. Chair, the only way to restrict hours, that's the question, is through a covenant, and the owner has to agree to that. There's nothing in our existing municipal bylaws that could restrict hours of operation of a business such as this.
Okay, so I've just quickly looked through the online, and there's 6 other storage units I looked at, and none of them are open after a place once 9 o'clock at night. And today I noticed that behind the cake there was a sign, and there's 400 self-storage units going in there, and they're not going to be open late at night. I think the latest they're going to be open is 8 o'clock. And so I mean, we've got, whatever, there's 500 here, and there's sort of 400 more going in. It seems a bit of a norm. So I think that's something we have to discuss.
I have a question to staff. An infamous gate in the back, the applicant indicated that it wasn't required for their use, but the other tenants in the building would require it. Is it possible that the applicant was amenable to it, that there could be a time restriction on that gate, whether it's 8 o'clock at night when the other businesses aren't operating?
Certainly, if the applicant was amenable to it, there could be a restriction put on through a restrictive covenant to tie down the timing and the use of that gate. Absolutely.
Okay. Maybe out there he has nodded his head. Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor German.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, we've had a number of things that have come up in discussion that whether we could tie the parking variance to the actual development permit and the use that it is dealing with. Secondly, the issue of hours, and finally the issue of the gate and whether in fact a time could be put on the gate. I would suggest that council find a way, and I recognize this has been deferred before, and this defer its decision until we have an answer back on those things. Those are important matters that at least in my case, are going to influence what kind of decision I make. If we pass this tonight, then we are, essentially authorizing the DP as it exists, and we have no way of guaranteeing to the community that those things that I think are viable suggestions will take place. So I would ask the clerk what the appropriate motion would be.
Council could postpone further consideration pending the response to the development permit on the parking tied to the use, to the hours of operation restriction, and the possibility of the gate being on a time.
I will move that council postpone decision until that information is before council.
Second. If I could ask for clarification, what we're looking for is nothing that the public hasn't spoken to already. So when it does come back, will council pick up on where we are now, or will we go through the public engagement again?
We would still have opportunity for public input on this matter.
Mr. Franklin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to support the motion to postpone. And having said that, I want to acknowledge what I think were some really good things that happened between the last meeting and tonight. I think, depending on how people view their issue, they have, given the proponent either, positive comments or not so. But I would say that it's oftentimes unusual to have people leave the comfort of their homes and come out here and speak positively about a proposal. That's just human nature, and there were people tonight who did come forward to say, I did have concerns, and the proponent has addressed them, and I support the issue. So I think that postponing has merit, because there's a value in getting this additional information and perhaps increasing the number of people who would speak positively.
Brunel, Saunders, Haynes, and German.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too am going to speak to postponement. I think that, as my colleague has just said, the applicant has really tried to work with the community and has adjusted a number of the variances and put in some extra landscaping, and there were people who spoke positively. But the more people spoke, I had all those same three comments my colleagues had: parking, hours of operation, and could the gate be restricted to not open after a certain hour. So I think if a lot of us had those questions, those are questions that need to be addressed, so I support postponement. Thank you.
Great, I think that in here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to clarify for council, if council did want to pick up this application where we are leaving off tonight, council could suspend the rules of the council procedure by motion to then not engage in public input when this comes back, allowing council then to pick up the pieces.
Maybe I could look to the mover, just ask if they'd like to.
I think that would be a subsequent motion.
Okay. Councilor Saanich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Certainly have so many talked about the same three things, that it's come a long way. It's pleased to see that the community has worked very hard and on a difficult situation, and then a lot of issues that have been going on for a number of years. And I think it's very close, because this is a use improved. We'll be 20 years looking at it, and as I say, I'm surprised to find another 400 storage units just a stone's throw going into basically the same parking lot. So I think it just needs to go a bit further and be tweaked and deal with these issues, so that down the road, for the next 20 years, it will work well. This is an old, stable neighborhood. It's not a new neighborhood. Homes that went in the 30s and 40s, and a lot of the same people living there, believe it or not. And when the Goodwill Bottling came in, they were a good neighbor, and things worked very, very well. But there have been some changes over the years, and change always does happen. So I think if we work through this thing, then hopefully the best outcome will happen for everybody. So,
Councilor Hayes.
So I'm going to support the recommendation to postpone. And I'd like to reflect, first of all, and commend people in the audience here, especially the residents who came forward and said how their concerns were met, and also those residents who said, well, hang on a minute, we still have some serious concerns, Mr. Ross in particular. In terms of the proponent, yes, they've spoke to the experts, and yes, they've got some expert advice on running a self-storage facility. And one of the issues they're running into is that right now their current use of that site with tenancy is not exclusively self-storage. So given that, the actual experts living in the area are the residents. They know what they've lived with, they've experienced the past 20 years. So one of the requests here from those residents was to reject outright. To reject the recommendation. So by postponing, we're going to a middle ground where we're going to look how we can improve the issues that were of concern, 24-hour use, perhaps, the parking, perhaps, and the time of the gate, perhaps. So I think through this process, we'll end up with a better result, given that this use is embedded in a neighbourhood. And the proponent has also said that the neighbourhood is their client. So I'm going to support the motion on that basis. Thank you.
Councillor German.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also would like to thank the neighborhood and the applicant for the progress that has been made. There has been some very considerable progress since the last time we met, and I think we're getting closer to a solution. But the items that are in front of us that we don't have direct information on at this time and can receive from staff and from the applicant, I think are very, very germane to what the neighborhood wants to accomplish. It is the job of council always to create the highest level of confidence and in fact guarantee that we can to the public that what is said in here actually happens. And the only way to do that is to find out if indeed that becomes part of the development permit or part of a covenant in terms of a timer on behalf of the applicant and so forth. So hopefully that won't take a long time. We will get those things sorted out and we will be voting on the best possible solution that we can arrive at this time. Guaranteed. Thank you.
Maybe I could just ask staff and move on. There are 3 items that we're looking at: the hours of operation, the parking, and the gate. That's everyone's understanding. Okay. Council, all in favor of the motion? Against? Carried.
I'll move the adjournment.
All in favor? Carried.
Thank you.